By the way, if you have any questions, just put it in the chat box. I'm capturing them and I'll ask them at the end of the session. Yep. Now recording.
Okay. So thanks very much, Bobak and Marie and everyone for offering to organize this and for attending. Can you see my slides? Is it working?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Okay, great. So yes, I just wanted to say a little bit, because that's an interesting question that Marie was asking. How did I, why do I have an interest in knowledge management? So I kind of stumbled or fell into organizational learning and knowledge management a little bit by chance, because when I was working, it was Oxfam, Great Britain at the time, but throughout my career with NGOs and also now with the UN, knowledge sharing, knowledge management, organizational learning are not things that we do very consciously or intently traditionally in our sector. And I worked both in headquarters, in a field office, in a country office, and I also traveled and worked a lot on a more short-term basis with offices throughout my career. And I was just quite amazed to see that the knowledge just doesn't stick. And for me, that was a problem, because I could see that we were making the same mistakes from, you know, one end of the world to the other, and not learning from that and not sharing what was learned. And for me, there was a bit of an ethical dilemma there, because these organizations receive funds from people and from organizations and from governments, and I feel we have a responsibility and a duty to make the best use of those. I didn't quite know when these ideas were forming at the time that there was such a thing as knowledge management, but then yeah, I found people who shared those views and those values in first at Oxfam and then elsewhere, and then little by little my network of knowledge management friends expanded, and that's how I met Marie and then Bobak. So that's just to say how I took interest in knowledge management in the first place. So this is the story of how we developed a strategy for learning and knowledge management in an international NGO, and the successes and the pains that came with that, which I'm sure some of you will probably will share. Bobak has already done a great work of introducing me, so I'm not gonna repeat any of that. But so this project, so the research, the strategy development, and then the implementation was something that I thought through as part of my professional doctorate. And I'll explain why the implementing phase was difficult. I'll cover that at the end of the presentation. And I will, because as we know in our sector, there's always lessons learned from any challenges. I will also present some of the lessons learned from these issues that arose. And hopefully that can be useful for you as well if you are working on similar projects in your respective organizations. So first, that's the definition of the learning organization that I chose, and I like it because it's brief, and it has this idea of the fact that an organization that learns is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's always the way I explain it when people ask, what is organizational learning? I explain, well, people learn as individuals, but organizational learning is bigger than if you put all the learnings of all the people together. And Peter Senji used this definition in the fifth discipline, but it's originally from a book from 1991 called The Learning Company by Pedler and other authors. So that's the definition that to keep in mind for the rest of this presentation. So in this presentation, I will go briefly through some background information for those of you who don't know the Fred Hollows Foundation. I will talk about the methods I used for my research and also give an overview of my results. I will go through the development of the strategy and the lessons learned from the project. So Fred Hollows was quite an amazing character. So he was an eye surgeon, and he was a very strong believer in social justice. He was an activist. He discovered in the late 1960s that indigenous Australians were very seriously affected by trachoma. Trachoma is an infectious disease that is only found in developing countries where clean water is not available. And it's extremely painful because what it does is that the eyelashes grow inwards. So they rub up against the cornea, and eventually it makes people permanently blind. And it's a very painful way of becoming blind, actually. And Australia, unfortunately, still to this day is the only developed country that has trachoma, and it's only found still in indigenous communities because of the lack of proper infrastructure of clean water, mainly. But yeah, so Fred Hollows started working in Australia, but then he went on to work in Nepal, in Eritrea, Vietnam, and he trained local eye doctors there. You might be wondering what's the common link between all these countries. Well, they were all at the time communist countries. Fred Hollows was communist. He was originally from New Zealand, but he's a very fondly remembered Australian because because as I said, he was a character and he did amazing work. And he actually became Australian of the Year in 1990, which the Aussies here can probably confirm is I think the greatest honor you can receive as an Australian citizen. He founded the Fred Hollows Foundation in 1992, and then he passed away the following year. And the foundation still focuses today on treating and ending avoidable blindness, and also fights for the rights of indigenous Australians, especially rights to health, to good health. And it operates in Australia, in the Pacific, in South Asia, East Asia, and Africa. So that's about more than 25 countries in total. So, excuse me, why build, what made us decide that we wanted to have a go at building a learning organization at the Fred Hollows Foundation? Excuse me. So from 2009 to 2013, the organization undertook a phase of rapid growth. So in our sector, at least, what I've observed is knowledge management seems to become a pressing need when in periods of great change. So for instance, I'm observing at the moment that knowledge management is becoming very trendy and very sought after at UNICEF with COVID-19. And it was the same for the Fred Hollows Foundation in that period of 2009 to and beyond. At the time, it was quite a small family-sized charity, but they rapidly grew. They changed their organizational strategy quite a lot, and they went from that to a medium-sized organization. And their ambition was to become even bigger than that, and become an international development NGO. So I joined in 2013, and they were still transitioning. So and the way it was working when I joined, but they were already thinking about how to do things differently, was that each country office had a program coordinator who was dedicated to that country, and who was based in the Sydney office. And this person was in charge of supporting, coordinating and developing the country program with the country team. So that meant that the country staff and the senior management staff, country staff, sorry, had a direct line of communication with senior management at headquarters, and including the CEO, actually. So, and countries were really quite appreciative of that direct line of communication, because that meant communication and decisions could be made fast. The problem with that approach is that it also led to duplication of information. Knowledge was getting sometimes siloed or stuck, and it was also a vertical learning, not horizontal learning, because the program coordinators, they were doing the same tasks for their country office, but they didn't have a forum to share their reflections or their challenges. And so, yeah, there was a duplication of solutions and a duplication of learning happening, but never a way to put all that together. So in 2014, there was a decision to create technical teams to address that problem. And so the technical teams were working across country programs. So they were, there was one technical team for all country programs around program development, around program funding, around monitoring and evaluation, around research, etc. So it was a lot more efficient. But in that transition phase, it meant also that country staff was finding it very difficult to navigate the new structure and to know the right person, to know. So there was the who knows who and who knows what was the difficulty they were having, because before they could just go straight to the person in headquarters, and when it changed, there were a lot of new people coming, those technical teams, so there was a lot of connection. And we know this personal connection are in smaller structures, that's what actually helps the knowledge to circulate. So yeah, the people on both ends, actually, in headquarters and also in country offices, didn't know any longer who, where and who to go to for knowledge and for learning. And in addition to that, I mentioned that a lot of people arrived, but there were also a wave of people who left, like it always is the case in change, in times of change in organizations. So that meant there was a loss of organizational memory. So there was obviously a problem to be solved there, and I was observing all these things, and then I applied to the University of New South Wales for a research degree, an applied research degree, and I thought that situation and trying to solve it in an evidence-based way would be a great case study. Yeah, the aim, the initial idea was to explore how we can better learn as an organization, and also do it really well instead of applying a quick fix, because the typical NGO way is there's a problem, we try to fix it in a few weeks, and then we move on, and we don't really think about it. It's like, yeah, it's a quick fix, really. And I wanted to do something a lot more in depth. I wanted to collect data around it, not just apply solutions, but know what the exact problems were that we were trying to address before trying to solve them. And yeah, and the vision at the time was to develop a strategy that would provide a clear picture of what the foundation could look like as a learning organization. Okay, so the plan that I proposed at the time was to do a rigorous self-assessment. to use a co-design process to develop a vision statement and objectives through stakeholder engagement, build a strategy, implement the pilot of the strategy, track progress using indicators, refine the strategy based on those indicators, and then repeat. So I will start by presenting a few of my findings. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I want to spend time on the strategy actually, but just to give you an overview of what we found. So the methodology used was a collection of methods actually. So we started with a survey to have a big picture of what the situation was, where we were broadly at as a learning organization, and yeah, just start to identify the big themes that were coming up. And I developed the survey questionnaire doing quite a lot of research in the literature to familiarize myself with what knowledge management organizational learning meant in our sector, which there isn't that much, or there wasn't that much at the time at least, of literature, I mean. So that was both good and bad. It was good because it made it easier to to do the literature review, but also it felt like there were gaps. So and then after the big sweep of the survey, we started zooming in on those themes that emerged in the survey to understand why we had found what we did, what was working, what was not working, and why. So we did internal interviews, and we also did external interviews with other eye health organizations, public health organizations, NGOs, INGOs, generalist INGOs as well. And our criteria for which INGOs to interview was that they had a good reputation for organizational learning. And the idea was to see what else could work, because as I said, there was not that much in the literature. I learned later that as a sector, we're not very good at capturing knowledge and learning in the form of academic papers. Oh, not really in any way, but especially not in the form of academic papers, hence the gaps. So the only way to fill those gaps was to talk to the people who were doing good work on the ground. And then we did some focus group discussions, and that was both to refine the findings from the interviews and also to get, it was strategic to get people talking to each other in the organization, about learning and knowledge management, because people didn't really understand what it was when I started the project. When I was talking about learning, people were automatically thinking about training. Knowledge management, people had no idea what I was talking about, even when I was trying to define it. So I thought, okay, a good way to solve that is to put them in focus groups, get them to talk to each other, give them a tool so that they can start breaking down what knowledge management and organizational learning means. And also to start to build a bit of a case for the need to do something about this among my colleagues. And so we analyzed all of this, the survey, the interviews, and the focus group discussions. And then we organized stakeholder engagement workshops, playing back what we had heard in the research, and in order to develop a vision for organizational learning and knowledge management and how to achieve it. And that was the co-creation part I was mentioning. And I will come back to that in a minute. So that was quite long on the methods. Sorry about that. In terms of the results, so as you can see, the survey was reasonably well attended, I guess, by respondents. So 56.4%. So the organization had 350 staff at the time. And for the survey, I requested, I sent it to 80% of staff, and I targeted program staff in headquarters, in regional and country offices. I wanted to talk specifically to the programs people, less so to the operations people, because that was, I guess, the angle I chose. And for the survey, I used Britain's themes, I guess. He has a great paper on the learning NGO. There's very few papers that exist, but he has a working paper on the learning NGO, and he has these categories. And so I used that to build the survey and to analyze it as well. So as you can see, the areas that colleagues said they would like to see prioritized, the top three were gathering and sharing internal experience, integrating learning into program strategy and policy, and creating a supportive culture. And I think it's not surprising that these were the three, because as I said, the organization had just gone through a period of transition. And yeah, we were lacking a supportive culture for learning. We were lacking mechanisms for internal experience gathering and sharing. And well, that's the second one, is a common issue in the sector. We're not very good at using the learning to, into our actual programs and projects, and also for policy making.
Can I just throw to you, Camille, because Anna's thrown in a question there, which is really interesting. So I think it's probably, if we cover it now and talk about why you thought it was important. Can you see those questions in chat?
No, I'm not, because so if you can read it to me.
Yeah, I'll read it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says, the question from Anna, good one. This is, you'll laugh at this question, Camille. How important was it really for people to know what KM and OL are? Is it important that they know the name? Does it not even add to the difficulty of getting people on board? Now, have a ponder of that, because Dick has then posted a response saying, so this is a really good discussion. So Dick says, I don't think it's important, because if you ask 10 people what KM is, you get 11 different answers. As long as we know that we understand understand their problem and show them how to solve it, they will be happy. Then Anna's come back. Can we get a reference for the paper? Oh, Camille, yeah. So that was it. So what were your thoughts? Why was it important up front to talk about that?
Well, that was learning for me early on, is it's not. And it was indeed more confusing for people when I was trying to explain. So that's why I dropped the terms in the end. I was only talking about the learning organization, and when I was saying that, I was actually explaining what I meant by that, which is that there's people learning in an organization, and then if you put all this learning together, the organization is greater, or the learning of the organization is greater than the sum of its parts, or at least that's the aim of the learning organization, and that was a lot clearer for people.
And that was that was the level of definition you gave them, was it? You stuck with this is what a learning organization, to get away from that confusion that both Anna and Dick were talking about. Yeah, the reason I was giggling is because I know this, and that's in our world, as you know, in knowledge management. You're right. 10 different people, you get 11 different answers. It's like, no, let's just talk about the outcome. So thank you for clarifying that, Camille. It was a learning. Yep.
Great. Thank you. Great question. So after the survey, as I said, we did interviews, so that's only a little snippet, a snapshot of one element of what we found. But so I used the software that maybe some of you know called NVivo. It's a software that helps you to analyze interviews or any kind of qualitative data through identifying keywords. And because I like mind maps, I created a mind map with all the keywords, because I could see that some of them were connected. And so, for instance, around the rationale, what was coming quite strongly in the interviews was what's the rationale for the need to become a learning organization. And then you can see that there were different arguments provided by interviewees. So the top three were becoming a thought leader, as an organization, addressing staff turnover and the lack of loss of organizational memory when people left, and also and people obviously didn't put it that way, but when I researched the literature, actually Mary taught me this concept of the VUCA world, so volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So my colleagues felt that, and I think it's correct, that being a learning organization can help address the challenges of operating in that volatile and uncertain world, which is our normal in the international NGO sector, both because of, you know, the way we are funded, because of where we work in often very volatile environments, of the fact that we often rely on local governments and other organizations for implementation. So yeah. And then, so this is the outcome of the focus group discussions. So we did 10 focus group discussions, and so that was 48 people together. So it was a reasonably good sample. And so I used a tool that was specifically designed for international NGOs, called Knowledge Management Capacity Assessment Tool. So it was good because this tool has been tried and tested in different organizations, and that meant that there was a bit of benchmarking happening. And as you can see, we scored 1.11 out of 4, which is quite low. And the idea was to use this also for us to have a baseline, and then do focus group discussions every 6 months using this tool to see if we were progressing at all. And so as you can see, the lowest categories that we scored the lowest on were on knowledge management strategy. Well, we didn't have a knowledge management strategy, so that makes sense. And also measuring and assessing the impact of knowledge management. And that's also quite obvious, because that's hard to do if you don't have a strategy that you can measure and progress against. And I just wanted to say, so this scoring is low, and it was good to do this because when I spoke to other organizations, quite a few of them had used that tool, so we were able to compare notes a little bit. And I remember that one of them, which is seen as you know, one of the top knowledge management organization, top NGOs when it comes to knowledge management in our sector, was scoring 2.5. So I was thinking, okay, so we're not great, but they're also not at 4. So there's hope. Yeah. So just to summarize, so as I said, we took all the data that we gathered through these different methods, and the main findings were that there was a strong incentive that was felt to become a learning organization, because we were in a complex and rapidly changing operating environment. And there were also some factors that were identified as influencing how an organization learns. So allocation of dedicated resources, so not only money, but also time and technology, developing adequate structures, systems and processes, having inspired leadership that acts as a role model, and fostering a culture of learning among everyone, all staff. And that also includes promoting the skills and behaviors that enable knowledge to be shared. Yeah, so we did this because we did this very thorough self-assessment process, because we wanted to have clear data that we could then use to communicate with people in a way that makes sense to them. We also wanted to engage them from the start in the process, and we wanted to have a baseline, a clear picture of where we were at to decide where we wanted to go. And there was also, and that goes back to being a thought leader, the other thing that people said a lot in this self-assessment exercise is sharing the knowledge produced within the organization with the wider sector, because there was a real sense of pride from people in what they knew, and they wanted that to be shared. So once we gathered all this information, we wanted to play it back to people and then build on that. And that's where the wonderful Mary came into the picture. And we had a lot of fun designing some interactive workshops for colleagues. We had 4 of them, and I can't remember how many people attended. I don't know if you can remember, Mary, that was a long time ago. But the attendance was very good, and the engagement in the workshops was excellent, and people were really enthusiastic about the project on the other side of that. I think there was still a little bit of reluctance and maybe lack of understanding of why we needed to do this and how we were going to do it, and but the workshops really cleared that with colleagues.
I think, just to let you know, I think however many there were more than 20 at every one of the workshops.
Yes,
So
you're right.
80,
I seem to remember 70 or 80 people, which is good for an organization of 350 people. Yep. So yeah, as I said, the workshops were there to build the ownership of the project and the upcoming strategy across the organization. Also make it clear why it was important, why they should care, and give them a visual representation of what a learning organization can look like. So these are, examples of the exercises we did. We did a river of life, and that was to show people, to explore the history of the foundation from the perspective of its employees, and show the importance of having an organizational memory. And it was interesting to actually go back to the origins of the foundation, and even prior to that, to Fred Hollow's personal history, because he was someone who really cared about knowledge. He wrote a series of excellent papers on, if I remember properly, the origins of trachoma among indigenous Australians, because it's a disease that did not exist before settlers came in. And it appeared in Australia because the traditional ways of maintaining good health in the community, which was very much around rituals and like using even ash in rituals on the face, was lost. Because people lost their rituals. So you really had a strong sense of memory, of history, and I personally believe that that's something that, even if it was lost a little bit in the foundation, that was there at the core. So that exercise was good to show that. We did a future state drawing for people to draw a visual representation of the learning organization, and that was directly used to develop the vision statement. And then we did a 6 thinking hats exercise that presented opportunities, solutions, and initiatives, and potential initiatives in more detail. Okay. I'm conscious of time. I don't want to go too much over, so I'm gonna keep a steady pace, or increase the pace a little bit maybe. So based on that, those workshops, we came up with a vision statement, which is this one. So the foundation seeks to become a leading knowledge hub and an innovator in eye health, by continually and consciously learning and transforming itself to end avoidable blindness and improve Indigenous Australians' health. So that was done in the workshops through an iterative process. And I was actually really pleased with this because without having to force it, it was kind of encapsulating all the themes that had come up in the research and putting it together in a way that made sense to people. So yeah, that was a really good vision statement. And so that was the one of the core elements of the strategy. And then another part of the strategy aimed to cover the different areas of the learning environment. So maybe you know this already. So a learning environment is an environment in which learning and knowledge can flourish. And so the color coding is, so in dark blue you have, I guess, the inputs, the resources. In light blue you have the processes, the how, and then in purple you have the people stuff. So the people aspect of things that can be broken down between people and skills, culture, and leadership. Okay, Mary, that's where we had said we could have a little interactive exercise.
Maybe we'll do a chat. Maybe a chat. Maybe what we'll do is throw that question up just for everyone to have a break. And based on what's happened so far, just in chat, have a chat race about the answers to those questions. So we can all do that.
Yep. So yes. So maybe what you could do here, and if you want to unmute yourself or share in the chat box, either is fine, is I'd be interested to know, because I didn't say what I wanted to learn from this session today, but I actually would like to know of others' experiences with the things that I'm exploring in the presentation. So I'd been really interested to know to hear 2 barriers and 2 enablers to creating and maintaining a learning environment that you have observed in either, if you are in an organization at the moment, in your current organization, or with an organization that you've worked with in the past. And from the perspective of technology and resources, governance and processes, and people and culture. It doesn't have to be 2, it can be whatever you like, but just interested in hearing what comes up for you when I ask this.
So you should share right in the chat box.
Sure.
Hi everybody, my apologies. I had a meeting that got thrown at me at the very last minute, and I didn't get a chance to say that I would be running late. So thank you for allowing me into the session late.
No problem. Welcome, Nikki. That's a long time. I'm going to throw one up. I was going to type it in, but I'll throw it up. My thought there is, and it comes under people and culture, and it's both a barrier and an enabler, and that's leadership, which I think you've already mentioned, Camille. People that just don't think outside of the way that they've always done things. So that's probably one of the big kickers. And the other thing that I will throw in is, in terms of technology, it's new sexy tools. And that's both, again, because they can be an enabler, but people usually implement them first and then worry about what they're trying to fix it later. So sometimes they really get in the way. So I'm going to throw that up. What else? What does everybody else think?
I was just writing it down because this is something that happened to me when I was working at the NHS. I was working at a very specific agency within, actually it was the Department of Health, but it was an enabling organization for the NHS, where people were brought in because they were the best of the best, and they were there to help innovation within the NHS. And it was really interesting because the main barrier there were people thinking that they didn't have time to share their knowledge. I interviewed most of the senior people within the organization, And the barrier was them not even recognizing that although they were the top people, they didn't understand they could learn as well. And it was as much about having time to give others as it was about needing the time to learn from others. And actually, I don't want to extend too much, and that actually led me to also change a word. Like Camille was saying in the beginning, she kind of dropped the knowledge management. I started to, when you talk about knowledge sharing, I started talking about knowledge interchange, which is really weird word, but kind of gives the more of a bidirectional flow of knowledge. So I started using that word a little bit more to encourage people to think like that. So yeah, that's my one of the barriers I find.
Great. Thank you.
One of the main barriers I see at the moment, especially in our COVID environment, is people deprioritizing learning. And you know, I don't have enough time to learn. I don't have enough time to attend some critical training or skills improvement that might help me in my role, because they're just so focused on doing their role, which then comes back to what you were saying before around you need to get the senior management on board to allow people to take an hour off to do a session or to do their own research. So that's been a big one I have really noticed of late. I think it's always been there, but it has been highlighted where people are working remotely and they have this shift of people can't see me doing anything, so I've got to work even harder, which then puts them under pressure to take time out to invest in their learning.
And it's interesting what people put also behind this word learning. I think very often they think learning is, you know, training, doing an online course or being in a classroom. But the truth is, especially in times of accelerated change and pressure like this one, we learn even more. We've all had to learn to use Zoom to quite advanced levels, for instance, because we spend half of our days, when we're lucky, on it at the moment. So people have all this stigma around learning.
I think there's Dick has popped something in there. Babak, do you want to cover what Dick has suggested in there? His enabling.
Dick, enterprise social media, such as, is that right? Such as MS Teams and Microsoft Teams is enabler, help the informations on formation of the community of practice. I guess that means the teams in Microsoft, which is a tool in Office 365, brings the people in one place, and you can actually collaborate in just one tool, and you don't need to go anywhere else. You can do chatting, you can do meeting, you can actually share the documents, you can actually connect it to the event website in just one place. It really enhanced the small team collaborations, and it's became very common, I believe. That's what Dix means. Correct me, Dix, if you have another meeting, another meeting. And yes, you can actually create a different groups using Teams. Yep. It's like another tool.
And I think Dick also mentioned there something about he did work, had a restructure, and it broke all the work he did because all the key people left. That's another one when you have key people that are supporting, then all of a sudden they've gone.
That's
so
right, yeah.
I feel your pain there, Dick. I think Camille's going to share a bit of pain like that too.
Yes,
anybody else? Another thing I just thought of, another barrier, I think, are key performance indicators and the performance culture of a lot of organisations, because they've got all of this detailed KPI reporting down to such a minute level that people now are being rewarded and punished if they don't focus on little tiny things. And because they're so finite about, oh, I need to do this, this, and this job, task, process, as opposed to my job is to deliver this outcome. It's forcing people away from the outcome down to the tasks. So in terms of sharing, all you do is, well, I don't need to share anything because I can do this task. But in terms of getting the deliverable, the outcome at the end, you might go look up and go, actually, to do that outcome, I would be able to deliver that a lot more effectively if I shared knowledge, worked with these other people. But people are forced down rather than looking up to the outcome because they're forced down that path.
Yeah.
I think it's another barrier.
So that's an interesting one, and Anna asked a really interesting question. She asked if that's the same in NGOs, if it's different NGOs. So for us, I would say that having KPIs, especially around learning, is an enabler. Or let's say around knowledge management, because we can use these words here. Because we don't do that. So we actually have no idea most of the time what we're doing, what we are doing works or doesn't work. So we spend a lot of time stabbing in the dark, and that's really what this project was trying to address is what are we doing, where does it work, where does it not, and how do we address that, how do we learn, and how do we do things differently.
That was the extreme.
Yes. Yeah.
But
that's something that NGOs do really poorly at the moment, and it's even driven further astray for us because often the KPIs or any kind of measurement of indicators is driven by what donors want, not by what beneficiaries want or by what country staff who implement the programs on the ground think is important to measure. So yeah, that's one area where we lack, I guess, a conscious process as organizations, as NGOs, or even UN organizations actually. But it's really important because if people feel they have to measure things for someone else's sake, they're just not interested.
Yep. Is that anyone else?
Do you want to? Nikki said something in the chat box.
Hey, Nikki, can you just say that? Verbalize what you just wrote.
Okay. So it's interesting. A scenario that I've been challenged with is we've had some people get redeployed from different areas through COVID, areas that aren't as busy, so the business doesn't want to put any staff off. And we've been working on a project around knowledge articles that are supporting our customer support staff who are supporting the clients on the end of the phone. And with redeployment of some staff to new areas in a restructure that happened in the beginning of the year, and with new staff coming in, I said, you know, now's the perfect time that we get the staff that have just moved out of that department to start to share the knowledge around specific questions and answers and topics for new staff that are either being redeployed, cross-deployed, or just moving into the role. And it just didn't seem to be a priority, which is quite amazing when you say, now this is the perfect opportunity. Those staff that have got the knowledge that have moved out, let's have discussions with them. Let's capture what we need to. They're still going to be there, but it's still not the same when you're remote. So I found that quite interesting, trying to sell the reason that we need to give people time to do these types of activities.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to something else that Dick wrote in chat, which is another barrier is KM or OL is for long-term, and companies are very short-term thinking at the moment. I think it comes back to that. Well done. Yeah, what a good link. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I was going to say about this one. So, yes, and what I so when I was doing the EXO interviews, the organization that is considered one of the top ones, if not the top one when it comes to learning and knowledge management, is MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. And they have a whole lot of mechanisms to capture learning in short loops. because they are an emergency organization. They have a business model that is literally sending doctors to emergency situations, work them to the bone for 6 weeks, and they know what they're getting themselves into. Then they have usually a burnout, or they just can't go anymore, and they need to then pass the baton to the next person coming in. So they can't afford not to have those short learning loops. And quite a lot of their processes are actually very similar to what the army does. And I think that's why they are one of the best learning NGOs in the world.
Wow. Thanks, Camille. That was a good little interlude.
Okay, good. Yeah, very interesting to hear what everyone else thinks and has experienced. Thank you for sharing. All right. Let me see. Okay, so so we then defined some. So we were explaining what we were. I was explaining what we explored in the stakeholder engagement workshops, and the reason why I went through this framework is because we defined some objectives, some strategic objectives to support the vision. And so we used the three areas of technology, process, and people and culture. So I'm not going to read them out to you, they're here. But as you can see, I mean, yes, we had something around technology, but it was always with people at the core, because we know that's what makes or breaks a strategy. And so you see, we use the word era because another framework that we applied is the eras of knowledge management, which is was coined by Nancy Dixon. I think she has a new one now, but I like this one, and that's the one I used, so I'm going to present that one. So she established that there have been roughly 3 eras for knowledge management. Will be interesting to see if there's a new one coming up with COVID, actually. And each builds on the next one. So information management, which I apologize, Sonia, I mean, that's probably quite a simplistic view of information management, but so capturing documents, establishing repositories for best practice, and also database for lessons learned. So that era was about individual learning for increased employee capability. Then, so that was roughly until the 2000s, early 2000s, and then when the internet started taking off, we moved into experience management with online communities of practice, skills locators, expertise locators, and processes that were more based on conversations between people and between groups. And then we moved into the ideation phase towards the end, around 2008, which is so you're using collective knowledge to create new knowledge, innovation, address complex issues. So in those objectives that I presented, we were, as you can see, roughly covering the 3 eras as well. And so the outcome of all this was a framework. So I know it's very small, and you don't need to see everything that is written, but I'll describe it to you. So the big circle in the middle is in orange. That's the vision statement that we called the big opportunity, and then the circles around were the strategic objectives. So in red here you have the objective around technology, the yellow one is around processes, and the green one was around people. And then so the three, so this kind of sun rays there, so communication and technology, governance and processes, and people and leadership. So each of these was addressing one objective in particular. And all these, the little bubbles that you can see within, are a mix of initiatives that were already existing in the organization, and new initiatives that we proposed based on the research and the discussions in the workshops. And we had a system to assess the maturity and the efficiency of the existing mechanisms, because what we wanted to show was that it's not something that we create from scratch. There's already knowledge, there's already things happening, and we build on that, and we organize it, and we rationalize it, and we make it more conscious. So that was the idea, and we called it the knowledge lens because it's a health organization. So that was fun. Mary, when I look at this, I always remember the work we did together fondly. Mary was the one who proposed this format and this way to organize the information. And it was really great because it was a one-page visual summary of what we wanted to do. So it was easy for me to walk people in the organization through it. So yeah, that was great for internal advocacy and for dissemination. People loved the fact that it was colorful. They loved the fact that, you know, looked a bit like a sun, the fact that it was called knowledge lens. So there's something also to be said when you work on a strategy about making it palatable for people. So the strategy was the what, and then Mary and I worked also on, well, it's great to have a strategy, but how going to actually implement it. So we needed an operating model for that. And what we realized was that the organization was very much operating in the left part of the screen, so as a pyramid, a hierarchy. But for this strategy to be implementable and to work, we needed to move a lot more into a more circular way of working. So what we proposed was to have some, we call them COGs, cross-organizational groups, to focus on one area, so technology and communication, process, and people, and then have a guiding and coordination team at the center, making sure that the initiatives that each group was going to undertake was aligned with the strategy, aligned with each other, and aligned with what else was happening in the organization, because obviously there was already a 5-year organizational strategy, so we didn't want to duplicate things. And in the upper right corner, you also see that there's a promotion team, and that is the team that in the design was going to advertise what the rest of the structure, the circular structure, was doing. And what is interesting is that this idea of having a dual operating system is adapted from John Cotter, but we had already used a similar model without knowing it. To address the feedback that was gathered from a staff survey that was done in 2016. So what was great was that we were able to put a model forward, but to say, well, that's just a visual representation of something we've already done. So that's a structured way of looking at something we've already done and that has worked in the organization. And that helped sell it, because going from a hierarchy to something more circular like that is, for managers, especially for directors, for senior management, that was quite scary, because that's something that I learned from the interviews and from the literature as well. There is this belief that part of what makes you a powerful a manager, a leader is what you know, and you're not really willing to share that. So seeing that, you know, your power is being devolved to others in the organization that was quite edgy, and being able to show we have already done it helped to sell this. Okay, so that was the strategy, that was the plan that we were very proud of, and at the end of the workshops, everyone seemed to be on board with that, and so we refined the framework, and then we put some text around it. We developed a strategy that was not too long. I think it was about 10-15 pages, but with lots of visuals, because we wanted to keep it easy and simple to read. And then I was asked to, so we had the buy-in from the base, if you like, from colleagues, but I was asked to also go to each director one by one and request their support to endorse this strategy at a directors meeting that was happening. I believe it was in, I can't remember, it was December 2017 or January, February 2018. So I did that, so you remember that I showed you the steps that I envisioned at the beginning, and so what happened was that we did the self-assessment, we did the vision statement and objectives, we built the strategy, but then yeah, so it would have been March 2018, the directors meeting, and unfortunately that's where things stopped, because we were not able to implement the strategy, nor to refine it, nor to repeat the implementation. And what happened, and that was, I must say in retrospect, something that I learned and I will always remember, and that was an oversight on my part, so all key stakeholders, like I said, were on board. The directors were on board, the CEO was on board. We had a change of CEO exactly at that period, and I made sure that both the previous CEO and the new CEO knew about it and were on board. And the new CEO actually told me, I believe in this exact term. And yet the project failed at the last minute, because the senior manager who was initially championing the project, who was the programs director, who I was working very well with, had left halfway through. And the new sponsor, the new senior management sponsor, who was the director of the knowledge and innovation division, she was not my direct report, but I reported directly to her for a time, and then I reported to her, to someone who was reporting to her. So I had identified her, I guess quite logically, as the new sponsor after the director of programs left, but she was not really behind it, because I think she couldn't quite see what was in it for her for some reason. And I felt, I kind of had an intuition that was the case, but I failed to recognize the importance of that. And there was another director who was a lot more on board, but he was reluctant to move on his own without her consent, without her also being on board. And with the change of CEO in that exact period, at the end of 2017, early 2018, yeah, they just, maybe the organization was not ready to take that big step. So what I learned was that I should have been a lot more cautious about who was the named sponsor and who was the actual sponsor, and I should have probably worked the other directors a lot more than I did. And that was a strategic mistake on my part that I've learned from. But what was interesting from all this is, in spite of all the evidence, the buy-in at different levels, these projects, or I think all applied research, or maybe not all applied, but some applied research projects don't always stand in the face of politics and this decision making from leadership, and it can come from one person. But I think if you get your champion wrong, it has a domino effect and everything just stalls. So the lessons learned from this, and I'm going to divide them in between foundational steps and then strategy development. So it's important to establish a baseline, like we did with rigorous self-assessment. And the fact that I was internal to the organization, I think, was a plus, because I'm positive that the organization would never have invested, 3 years of someone else's, an external person's time to this. I mean, I was doing other things as well, but I did spend a lot of time on this project. And I think that the fact that I was an internal person means that the organization, at that point at least, at the initial stages, really cared and owned this. And I think credit should be given to a great extent to the director of programs who I mentioned, who really believes in organizational learning. And if there isn't an external person, internal person, the alternative would be to get research students to do it. There's plenty of research students out there who would love to do that kind of work in organizations. Also, starting with the why we want to become a learning organization was an important selling point. And I learned from Mary that it needs to be articulated both in terms of burning desire and burning platform. So the burning platform is, what harm are we causing or not avoiding by not having information, data, knowledge, and using it to back our decisions. So that was our burning platform. And also the fact that we are in a knowledge economy, in a competitive environment. And if we don't do this, we won't remain relevant, basically, if we're not a knowledge broker. And then the burning desire was around starting with low-hanging fruit. So that's what I was saying about, all these initiatives that already were existing in the organization and that people really liked, and showing, well, we can do more of this. So for instance, we were doing lunchtime seminars and people loved those. We were doing communities of practice. We did some online challenges and people were really enjoying them. So we said, well, you want more of those? Well, get behind this project and you will get more of those. Using these small successes as well to build a case. And creating a compelling story that was based on the evidence we had collected. And that was important for us to have a fan base, and we did have some big fans of this project at different levels of the organization. Like I was saying, for us, the data that I collected showed that there was an appetite to be a thought leader, to be a knowledge hub, to share what we knew with the outside world, and that really appealed to both the base, my colleagues, and also senior management. And then in terms of the development of the strategy, so really important to involve key stakeholders at every step of the journey, from the data collection to the analysis, to the co-design of the vision and the strategy. And obviously, if we had gotten to that stage, as you saw from that circular model, implementation, tracking, and refining. Another thing is to present the findings regularly to keep the conversation going as you discover them, and also to create trust and curiosity. And that really worked, to have people regularly updated on what was going on. I think I did a few presentations throughout on what I was finding with my research, and people enjoyed that. And they started understanding little by little what we were trying to do and why it was important. So yeah, talk about learning and the learning organization often. One tip I learned from the MSF knowledge management person is have these conversations casually, and then if you see people someone is interested in one of these one-on-one exchanges, get their email address and put them on your mailing list or your newsletter mailing list, because these are going to be your champions. And yeah, in terms of the strategy, keep it short, simple, action-oriented, have visuals. Really important to have a one-page strategic framework, and a little bit of information on how it will be piloted. So we came up with a series of recommendations for the first year with an action plan. We didn't want to make recommendations beyond that, because we wanted to keep space to refine in a way that would make sense based on the ongoing data we were planning to collect. And yes, planning how you will track progress is part of your strategy. So so people know what you will be measuring, how, and yeah, like I was saying, that's not something that we do well in our organization, in our sector. And that was also a selling point for this strategy, that it's not just a strategy for the sake of it, it's a strategy that is intending to change things, and that and they could see exactly where things, where we were aiming to change things. And that's the end.
Wow.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. I guess everyone has raised their questions so far, but if you have any questions, they can raise it. We have 15 minutes, right? Roughly.
Yeah, why don't we throw, there's only a couple of us left now because Dick had to go. So Anna, Nikki, thoughts, questions, observations about that? We might just wrap up with that kind of a conversation. That was, well, it reminded me a whole lot of stuff that we did, and I was like, oh, I remember that. But what about you guys? Comments, observations from Nikki or Anna?
I'm so sorry again that I missed the first half. I'm looking forward to, if you're doing a recording, just to be able to go back and listen to, you know, your journey.
We can stop recording, that's fine, yeah.